Welcome to What's in Store with Carly and Chris, the show where we cover hot topics at the cross section of retail and real estate. I'm Carly Iacono, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Ressa. Chris, good morning. How are you today?
I'm excellent. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you. I'm very happy that we are taking a much needed break from talking about tariffs today. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to talk about basically anything else. How about you?
For sure.
So today we're talking about a completely different topic. It's things that we would like to change in the commercial real estate industry. Now, this is not just a complaint fest. This is meant to be a conversation of things that Chris and I think would make the industry more efficient, would make it more enjoyable to work in and just better for everybody. So we thought this would be kind of a fun twist on our normal content to share with you some of our pain points and things that we hope will change in the future. You ready?
Ready.
Let's do it. All right. The first one is the transparency of data and deal flow. Now, we come at this from two different sides. I know as a landlord, you're really focused on tenants. Tell me what tenant data you wish you had access to.
I mean, obviously, I would say data transparency is one of the things in our industry where people have prospered is the fragmented information that happens in the industry. Someone learns of something that maybe others don't know about, and they're able to create an opportunity based on that. That's just happened for the dawn of time in commercial real estate. But there are certain things I think that data transparency would make the industry more efficient and potentially would create more opportunity. And one of the things I think about are the retailer sales. And I think that generally speaking, most retailers are in commercial leases are required to report sales. I'd love to get to a point where that was, almost all, if not all, but more taking it up a notch. There's a lot of retailers where now the store is more important than ever, and the value of the store is more than just the four-wall P&L. And while that is critical, the value of the store, some of those drive online sales, lowers customer acquisition cost overall. It creates engagement with the consumer. And, historically, the rent has been paid based on just, the four-wall sales, but the store is much more valuable than that. And I'd love to see, two things. One, better information on the four walls of that physical location, but also the real value attributed to that location. And now I don't think not all retailers are in the same place as it relates to this. Some don't sell online, some are an omni-channel, some don't value the store that way. But more and more retailers are looking at the store as such a vital piece of their business, much more than even the four-wall P&L. So that's the piece of data that, the first thing that comes to mind for me on data transparency.
It's a big ask. So not only do you want sales, you want to know what online sales are attributing to the store and how they're valuing that. I love it. I think it's a big ask. But let's start
and
at the
the value of the consumer engagement.
Okay, we didn't get to the first two, but okay. So baseline sales, you said most tenants are reporting under their leases. That is not the case in single tenant. We almost never get sales unless it's a QSR or a drugstore. In some cases, most categories don't report at all. So to me, that would be and grocery, right?
I would tell you that if you went to, generally speaking, all the retail leases in America, and then we'll never know. Maybe we will if we got data transparency on what is the percentage. But in general, I think more tenants are required to report based on leases than not if you just took all retail real estate across the land. There might be some product types that less than others, but I think
Right.
generally speaking, in the landscape of retail real estate, more tenants are required to report than not.
And I think it goes by category. It just seems to be what's accepted by landlords in certain categories. And hopefully that is changing. To your point, that would be wonderful if we had more transparency in store performance. And we have data providers like Placer who are estimating the sales. So that's a great tool. And I think we'll see more of that sort of, third party data. But it would be great to have the direct data and the leases too. I agree. I think that's a huge indicator. But that's not enough for Chris Ressa, and I don't blame you, because the store is become such a different piece in the overall puzzle, right? It's not just about point of sales, it's about customer acquisition and marketing and all these other things. So, how do you think they would attribute that? Like, how would you love to see in a perfect world this reporting broke down? Right? You would have a separate column that says we're attributing $1 million of value to this location, even though that doesn't translate, directly to sales, or sales are a separate number. How can you imagine that being reported?
I think like the rudimentary way would be like most times you're going to a store and like their your your zip code is taken.
Hmm.
So I think the understanding the amount of purchases in that zip code, whatever zip code we're attributing that store to, that don't come from in the store, is a pretty good telltale sign of that store's. Now there are some retailers who would and argue with me that this is not the greatest data point, but I think it's a start of how much sales are driven out of that zip code that aren't done physically in the store.
Couldn't you just use traffic then? Foot traffic? Isn't that kind of the same I mean, I guess that doesn't indicate a sale per se, but we already have the cell phone data showing
So
where people are coming from,
there's
where they're
some
going.
foot traffic's great, but there are things that like foot traffic struggles with when you're using cell phone data.
Mhm.
So one is, families. So if um, if I'm going to the store with my kids who don't have a cell phone,
Mm.
so it's underestimating that, and especially where um, family, where there's markets that are heavily family concentrated. It's that's a challenge. It struggles in going up and down vertically in buildings. So in urban environments
Oh,
where
interesting.
it's up and down.
Mhm.
Um, so and the you have to do a lot of extrapolations, and there's obviously statistically relevant data extrapolations to get to, and estimations to get to traffic to sales. Traffic is great intel. The providers are amazing. I would say that the if I know how many people are coming to my center and or coming to that store, that still doesn't help me on the people who didn't but purchased from the retailer in whatever market that store's serving.
True. Do you think there's any detriment to the retailer's business by having this information be accessible? And I
There
guess I
are
would qualify.
many there are so many retailers that want to report sales
Really? Why?
because it's very simple. What we're it's not that they don't want to share the information, it's about what percentage they want to pay based on
Right.
that. So I would tell you there's a significant amount of retailers who want to share the sales, who are like, listen, I want to pay you this. If we do great, happy to share in the great. But if we don't, we're going to share in the not. So that's there's a lot of retailers who are happy to share the four wall sales.
And I think the differentiator here, though, is you're talking about almost a partnership with the landlord. They want to share sales, so they're not overpaying and they have sustainable rent in partnership with their landlord having some upside. I'm looking at it more that I would love to see retail sales so I can compare the quality of deals across multiple markets, right? I want to be able to look at 5 of the same tenant with surety from the outside, not being the landlord, and know which one's performing better, which one I think is higher risk, et cetera. And I think that will be hard to get to from a complete data transparency, which again is why we have third parties estimating it for us right
I
now. But
think
I think
I
that
think
level.
I'm interested in the same information as you are. I I'm all I'm doing is defending my point as to why
They won't
I
mind.
I think today it's not as bad as we think holistically, and that there's opportunity for information share.
Good. Okay, I like it. I'm glad you're positive on that. That would be helpful for all of us for sure. I think in terms of data transparency, one thing I would love to see is more clear transaction data. We have some really strong players, obviously, that we all know and use: RCA, CoStar, Placer. We have CBRE Deal Flow. But every time we're valuing a property, we're pulling comps from multiple sources. So it'd be great to have a central database um, with everything and have all that information kind of verified by public record, which it is to some degree, but some states report differently. The information available is different based on where the property is located. So just a standardization of transaction history, I think would be great. And then a little more transparency into the lease terms and what that deal looked like, not just the price, would be extremely helpful for everyone. Because comp data is not always the same, right? Sometimes you don't see the cap rate, you just see a price. You're trying to extrapolate that from price per square foot, which is tricky. So that
For
would be
sure.
one of my wish list items.
For sure.
All right, let's move on to timeline. This is one that I get pretty riled up about. And I know I know you do too, but maybe for different reasons. It is the amount of time it takes to get through a transaction. And we can both look at this with frustration, from everything from selling or buying a stabilized deal to development. Both have different challenges, but just the time it takes for, let's start with, let's say, an acquisition, right? Decision makers to review, investment committee to weigh in, maybe not with TLC, but with a lot of companies. And then finally get the LOI, and then that's negotiated. The whole start to finish process is absurdly long. Where are your pain points in transaction timelines?
Yeah, I don't I think this is just everything in commercial real estate. This is you know, to me, the PSA, the loan docs, the lease, the contract with the engineer, the general contractor. These things take too long, and we are, we're baking, to the amount of time it takes to get approvals and everything. And I always use the analogy that in my first job at Sherwin-Williams, we used typewriters for the leases. We sent the leases back and forth via FedEx, like to get red lines, comments back and forth. And we got deals done faster than we do today. On
I
a,
still
like,
can't
a,
believe it was a typewriter.
yeah,
Really? You're not
yeah,
that old. That's
I know.
crazy.
And we got deals
Okay,
done
but
faster.
still faster.
And
I mean, that says
so
a lot, right? We have more
with
tools today, and it's
way
just
more
slowing down the
technology
process.
tools, but
Yeah.
we have we have a lot more people involved in the decision making process of a deal in corporate America. Um, Everybody is trying to protect liability across the board, and those two things really drag out deal times. And like the the reality is that I believe that if you just took like an industry and you look at like tech, right? They don't focus on the exceptions in general. They move fast, saying that we know we'll probably lose on some of the exceptions, but the opportunities you gain from going fast outweigh some of the losses on the exceptions. And that's what it really comes down to is, does the industry think that moving faster, potentially making some mistakes, but also creating more opportunities by moving faster, those outweigh some of the risks? And on a one-off basis, it's easy to tell yourself it doesn't. But on a whole, you would most likely, the wins would outweigh. And I think there is a risk in deal timing that we don't consider enough, which is like, I don't know, let's take a different example. Carly, you and I are looking at a piece of land to buy to build a 100-unit apartment building. We're looking at it today. We haven't called a broker, an owner. We haven't done anything, but we think this is a great site. When are people living in that building?
3 years, 4 years, depends on where in the country it is.
Okay, so
Because
3 or 4
timelines
years.
are different, but
Let's use it.
significant,
But
right?
essentially what we're saying is we want to invest significant money today to satisfy a demand we know is here today, but we're not going to be able to deliver that product to satisfy the demand for 3 to 4 years from now.
Right. So
Is
many
it
factors can happen between
isn't
now and then.
shouldn't the goal be, if that's the case, we need to compress that timeline as significantly down as possible, because we know the demand is here today. You never know if it's there tomorrow.
Exactly.
And like, that to me is, we've said as an industry, like, hey, each little iteration and making sure it's tight and perfect is more important than the timeline.
I
Otherwise,
completely agree.
right? Like if most deals, like if everyone dropped everything and said, let's do it right now.
It can
Like,
be
I don't
done.
care. I don't care
Yeah.
what it is, whether it's a contract for a general contractor, a PSA, and this or that.
Yeah.
Like, the reality is, all it would take is people being powered with the ability to make the decision. And if they were, you could do it right then and there.
Yeah, I definitely think we undervalue the risk in extended timelines as an industry. And it could be any type of deal. We're negotiating a contract right now on a new construction gas convenience deal that is approaching 2 months. Very straightforward deal. No reason. It should be this long. And the buyers in a 1031 exchange were running up against deadlines. And now there's risk of getting this deal actually closed on time. We haven't even signed the contract with the buyer. So the frustration is it's just related to the PSA going back and forth and minutia. Honestly, buyer wants to do the deal, seller wants to do the deal. Everybody's on board with the business terms, which is a key thing, right? All the business terms are agreed to. No arguments. It's the legal language in the contract back and forth for 2 months. So things like that, I think we lose sight of what the goal is. The goal is to have the seller sell this property, the buyer to buy it. Everybody's aligned. So why do we lose sight of the end goal? Same with development, to your point. There's a building, there's a need for multifamily. In your example, we know that the town wants the building to be built. Why does it take 3 to 4 years to get all these pieces together and get it out of the ground?
So
I think that's where we fall short.
I mean, and there's also some simple things of prioritization, right? Like, if I had a meeting with someone and we're like, all right, look, I think there's a deal here, let's get it done. And I said to them, okay, let's come to my office and not leave until we sign it.
Right.
Well, it would be, the reason that they would be against that well, I need to get it approved. So they don't have the ability to make the call, right? Too many people in the decision-making process. I need this person to opine on it. I need this. They're out on vacation, blah, blah, blah. rather
Right.
than like I had once someone say to us, we only do leases in person. I said, great, I'll do that. Come to our office, but there can't be one decision in the document that the people in the room don't have the ability to make.
Of course. Then it makes the process not work in your scenario.
Right. So, which means you can leave there signing it. So, but we don't do
Yeah.
that.
We had similar example in the 1031 exchange world. I've had people come to me with 1 day, literally 1 day left on their ID period in a panic, never met the client. They said, I want to do an exchange. I'm not going to pay taxes. Okay, that's conversation one. And I need to find something today. This was years ago, but it was such a crazy story. The client and their partner sat in my office all day. They came at 9 in the morning. By 5 p.m., we had 3 accepted offers and we had a contract draft starting on one of them. We had that exclusivity. We felt like the client was in a really good position, but we sat there all day making calls, reviewing deals, dealing with counsel. And we got it done to that point in 1 day because we had to, because everybody had to. And that was the expectation. So if you know that it can be done, that just makes it more frustrating when it gets extended, no matter which part of the deal we're talking about. So,
So, to me, in that scenario, the tools we have today should be able to help us make that happen even faster, right? So, what
exactly.
that person should go to your office, they should plug in, here's my tax scenario, here's this, here's
Yep.
what I'm looking for, and boom, these are the best options. And it should say, would you like me to call them on your phone right now? Yes. And it dials it for you, and
Right.
you talk, and by lunch, your deal's done.
With an agreed upon LOI. But you have to be able to reach everybody. The decision makers have to be aligned and available. And it's like you said, too many cooks in the kitchen on some of these, and too many provisions and complicated things outside of the deal terms that slow it down. So simplification. And that leads us to our third bucket, which is exactly that, simplification of documentation. And I think this is not the only reason that transaction timelines are extended, but certainly a massive contributor. And this is, again, our PSAs, our LOIs, our contracts, everything has gotten very, very long and complicated. Leases, we both look at them all day. Sometimes the leases are so long, 50 pages, 60 pages, ridiculous, that
100.
you have 100, right? You have to take time reviewing provisions because some of their own provisions in the lease conflict each other because there's just too many provisions. So you spend time going, well, that's kind of vague. I should probably get counsel to weigh in on if this makes sense with that or how I interpret, you know, provision 72.4A as it relates to 3B, as it relates to, I mean, it's crazy. And these are for just, in my world, basic single tenant net lease, national tenant deals, really not that complicated. So I think our leases and our PSAs, everything has gotten too elongated. And that's a huge problem in terms of efficiency in transactions.
Yeah, even like we talked about time number two. The simplicity to me is more about clarity
Hmm.
and um, all these documents, whether it's your document with the the engineer, the PSA, the lease, the document with the your retainage agreement that you have to sign with your attorney that you want to choose to work on the
Right.
contract that you
Even
have.
get started. Yeah.
So in general, documents have become too complex, long, and that causes a lot of problems. And one of them is just clarity in documentation. And the lack of clarity is a document now tries to cover every scenario
Right.
instead of just the basic terms of the deal. Because what if? And the what if, what happened before of this is you would go to court And the people, what the documents try to do is prevent people from going and litigating.
Which is
And
good. I mean, when you
I,
say it that way, it's like,
right,
great, put that paragraph in if we can save a lawsuit. Who
I,
wouldn't want that
so, but
in singularity?
the things that the difference is, the reason that like some industries move so fast is because you might be preventing a lawsuit for sure, but it's like, what is the chance of that happening?
Right.
Right. Right. In a, you spend time negotiating the casualty provision because of a tornado. But if like there's never a tornado, but it covers like what happens, how proceeds work, and all these things, if there is a tornado, but like,
Right.
but most times there's not a tornado.
Right.
Thank God. Right. Most times there's not. But if God forbid there's an earthquake, there's a provision in the lease that tells you how you're supposed to handle the scenario.
Yeah.
Right. And the reality is, what would happen if there was that is either the parties would come together and make a deal, or they would end up in court. And people said, let's make the deal now as if it happened.
Right.
And if you do that for every circumstance in a general contract agreement, in a lease, in an engineering agreement, you end up with these long, complex documents that are primarily talking about things that rarely happen.
Right. So maybe taking on infinitesimal amount of additional risk for scenarios that are highly unlikely would allow us to avoid the risk of extended timelines, which is very real and undervalued. So I
Or,
think,
you know what? I think the first part is even more true that you said, if we just eliminate speed from this, because we talked about speed,
right,
the first point is it's so complex. So
right,
what happens is when whatever it is happens, right? The casualty example is just, an easy to understand one. Whatever it is, because documents, whether they're, and I'm talking about every document, whether it's our document with our software provider, whether it's in general, right? What happens is that two things happen anyway. Either one, both parties disagree on the interpretation. Now, that doesn't always happen, but we spent all this time
yeah,
negotiating it to make
right.
it complex,
And
and
now no one agrees on
now
what
to
it
what
actually
it
means.
what it actually says. And then
Yes.
and so what it also leads to is no one wants to, at that point in time, it was done 15 years ago, or it was done 2
Or
years
more.
ago, and the world has changed. And so
Right,
what we want to do is let's just talk about it and make a deal.
right.
And so the parties decide to work outside of the agreement and cut a different deal about what happened in that scenario.
Yeah.
And I think that's what would happen most of the time, is the parties would cut a deal outside of the document to handle whatever scenario ended up. But instead, we're cutting that deal up front to deal with the unknown and unknowable. And
Mhm.
then we are probably, in most cases, cutting another deal later on.
So how do we revert back to more simplistic, clearer documents? Not elementary, well-written, tight agreements, but more straightforward. Do you think AI is our answer in this and just giving us the core language? Do you think some sort of form contract? I can't imagine that in commercial, but how do we revert back from this kind of mess that we're in now with all these different agreements?
I think, you know, you have to start somewhere. I think it has to be, we have certain documents that are short form compared to the long form. And, talking about it with the other parties and why we would want to use this. And we get pretty good participation in that. I think it comes down to that we have to get to a place where we've, as an industry, made a decision that the risk is not as great for whatever it is, that
Right.
that we are and we're going to make this change. And today, everyone's kind of, there's like, unspoken consensus that it has to be this way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I have the greatest solution to this one. I could just say that I think that if you just look at the end result from the complex documents, I think the reality of that it's probably saved significant litigation. Let's just assume, we'll never know, but let's assume that's true. But was the cost worth it
Right.
as an industry? Don't know, because we haven't gone the other side.
Right.
I think we need to, like, like when you decide you want a new software and you do like a 30-day test pilot, we need a test pilot.
Except a lot of these issues don't happen for 10 years, 15 years later, and
But
then you're relying on the previous document. But yes, we need to speed it up pilot program for simplistic documents. I bet AI can run all of these scenarios. Here are the risk, here's the average litigation cost for the industry as a whole. I don't know. I'm sure there's
yeah,
some sort of
probably
data amassing that can be done there. But
at the moment, I'm
at
slogging
the
through the
moment,
documents like everyone else.
me too. Me too. 70-page leases all day. I think the last thing I wanted to touch on, just going beyond leases and PSAs, are some of the due diligence reports. And this kind of goes through efficiency, but also simplicity and clarity. Things like surveys. I think it's amazing that we need to resurvey the same property during due diligence. Most of our clients, basically all of them, get a new survey every time they buy a deal. Now, unless it's new construction and there wasn't a building before, it's the same building, right? We're now having another surveyor measure the same building. What's even more amazing to me is they often will get different numbers, not dramatically, but a little bit here and there. And I know you see this with tenants and tenant fit outs too. So is there a way that we could agree on building dimensions, just basic building dimensions, and then that goes into a centralized database? This building is XYZ, and we all agree, and it does not have to be redone every time. Like, how do we solve that?
I mean, well, the simple dimension one is, the reason that happens is because it depends on how you're measuring. You'll get like, it depends on how you're measuring, and you can
Right,
get to
but
a
why do we
different
have
number.
different ways to measure a square? Like, could we just as an industry decide it's corner to corner, it's middle of the wall to middle? Like, it feels like we should be able to agree on that, but no.
Yeah. You're because you have the freedom of choice to measure it how you want to measure it. That's why.
Right.
That's why. That's
Great.
really, that's the
It's
answer.
very helpful. I'm
You
glad
have the freedom
I'm
of
glad we have
choice.
that freedom of choice to
Your freedom
decide
of choice.
how the measurement is calculated.
I
So
think
maybe some standards would be good, just basic agreements.
I'm surprised that more things aren't using the blockchain as a recording mechanism.
Mm,
That's what I like. That would speed things up, make it more efficient. I'm surprised that, like
like
instead
title.
of like digging through public records,
Yes.
like
Yes.
you could just pull up your computer and or pull up your phone and go to the blockchain. Like, feels like that's an I don't want to say
Feels
easy one,
logical.
but it
Yeah.
feels like one that could be done. I've been
Mhm.
surprised that the blockchain hasn't like taken this on. Like, the people who are invested in this, I'm surprised.
Yeah, I
That
don't know what the pushback is, but we brought that up years ago as the
I don't
way
think
that
I don't
contracts
think
and
so.
title
That's
were going.
I don't think it. I'm not sure there's pushback. I think there's only so many initiatives that and solutions that things can provide. And like, I think at the end of the day, at some point, some company is going to show up at ICSC and talk about how they're, the blockchain for this, and it'll start to roll out. And that hasn't happened yet. But that's one I'm surprised at, like, that hasn't happened.
Yeah. Hopefully someone will comment on the show notes that they're working on it and they'll see us at ICSC in May. Never know. Maybe it's already being done.
I'm sure.
Well, that was our wish list of changes in commercial real estate. I'm excited that I think some of these are being tackled or trying to be tackled by different companies and different technology providers. So hopefully some of these things that are really pain points will ease and help the industry move forward more efficiently. Some of them, I don't know. We're just going to have to hope for the best, and in the meantime keep slogging through. Anything to add before we wrap up for today?
No, this is notwithstanding all this, I think this industry is awesome, and I think that while we have our issues, the good parts are better than those, and I hope that we can get to a point where we can solve some of these, because it'll make it even more
Even better.
exciting, engaging, and a better place. So
Exactly. We're not going anywhere. It is a great industry. All right, to everyone listening, that was this episode of What's in Store with Carly and Chris. We're so happy you tuned in, and we will see you again soon. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks, Chris.
thank you.